Well, you said that Axios said that among the leadership in Iran, they were discussing it.
That was from a couple of weeks ago. That was right after the Ankara summit. But something along those lines, either leadership or officials, I think it was officials. So when I say officials, it could be just members of parliament, which there's like 200-300 of them, I think.
Yeah, because there's no doubt that the Israelis have no access to what the high-ranking people in Iran say. There's way too much security for that. And the Iranians are much too smart for the Israelis or the Americans when it comes to these issues. One of the things about the Iranians is that they put so much information out there that the Israelis and the Americans are often at a loss as to what is right and what is wrong. One of the things about Iranian intelligence that I know of a bit is that in the when the U.S. embassy was taken, because the United States supported the Shah, they helped the Shah impose a police regime, a police state for 2.5 decades. And then, of course, during the revolution, the Shah used his army to gun down people for many months, but ultimately fell. And the U.S. embassy, from the very beginning, was working to overthrow the state. They gave refuge to the Shah, the United States, and then the embassy was working with remnants of the previous regime, the military, to do a coup, with separatist groups to create armed insurrection, terror organizations, militant groups in Tehran and other cities to create unrest. The U.S. embassy was the center of a conspiracy against the new Islamic Republic. And so that's why the students took the embassy, because they were afraid of a repeat of 1953, the U.S. coup, the U.S.-British coup back then. But regardless of what happened after the embassy takeover, one of the things that happened was they took all the information, the secret information that the CIA had in the embassy, and they began to publish them and read them and publish them, and then those documents that were shredded, they put them all together, and it was like 50 or 60 books. And so a lot of these students, later on, they joined the intelligence. And some of them became the initial, let's say, group that ran Iranian intelligence. And they had already learned a lot about how the United States functions and how the U.S. intelligence agency, the CIA, how it functions. So what they would do is that they would send a lot of Iranians who, some of them worked for the Shah's regime. Some of them were people who were about to retire from the army, and a lot of them, like, just not religious people who could convince the CIA that they were with them. So they would send these people to U.S. embassies abroad to offer themselves to cooperate with the CIA. And apparently a lot of these double agents, a lot of these people became double agents for the 1980s and the 1990s. And they misled the CIA a great deal during those 2 decades. I don't know about afterwards, but I knew a thing or two about what was going on back then, later on, but I don't know what they do now.
You knew a thing or two. Were you one of them, Professor?
Me? I was, when I was 16, I volunteered to fight in the war. And I've never, I've only lived abroad. I've only lived abroad from 1999 to 2003, 3.5 years doing my PhD in Birmingham. So nothing much goes on in Birmingham, but in the UK. I mean, I'm not to disrespect the city, the people of Birmingham, but it's not. I don't think it's the center of intelligence gathering.
It's not Brussels, that's for sure.
Yeah, and so in any case, So in the 1980s, the early 1980s, I was either at school or at university, or I was in the war fronts as a volunteer. And I survived 2 chemical attacks. So whenever I whenever I hear Americans or Europeans talk about human rights, I break out in what they say. I break out in a rash. It's like, yeah, really, the Americans and the Europeans and human rights. Nowadays people appreciate it more because of Gaza, because of the war on Iran, because of Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Venezuela, Cuba. But back then, yeah, it was, surviving chemical weapons was a horrifying thing. And of course, the irony is that the Germans did more than anyone else to provide Saddam Hussein with those chemical weapons. And of course, ironically, they overthrew Saddam Hussein in the name of those very same chemical weapons that they gave to him to use against people like me. Anyway, that's a different story. So the U.S. intelligence on Iran has never been very good. And the same is with Mossad. I think Mossad and the United States create this aura of invincibility and that they know it all, and the Iranians like to play with that a lot. And the Iranians they played with them quite effectively. And as we see with the military, I mean, if the Israeli regime and the Americans had so much intelligence on Iran, they wouldn't have carried out these two catastrophic wars. They would have known what exists in Iran's underground missile cities, what exists in Iran's underground drone cities. They have no clue about what the capabilities of the country really are. So,
just on that one, I want to say, my counterpoint to you was, I think you're dismissing their capabilities. And look what they did. The Hamas leader, for example, when he was in Iran, they knew which hotel room they planted a device. Also, all the leadership in Iran, which we're going to talk about, the leadership who replaced him recently, who was appointed by Mujtaba Khamenei. But the leadership that was targeted and assassinated, other than the supreme leader who was in his home, other leaders were targeted throughout the war. But your counterpoint it wasn't meant as a counterpoint, but the point you made about not knowing how the war will turn out, but also Iran's missile capabilities and the ability to fire missiles, fire drones. Trump saying he was surprised that they fired at the Gulf kind of makes your point that maybe either the intelligence was good and the U.S. was misled, but then the U.S. Trump was misled by the intelligence community intentionally, or the intelligence community genuinely had false intelligence and expected the war to go differently.
Well, there's talk of deceit and deception and deceiving the American people nowadays. But I don't think targeting Iranian leaders was a great intelligence coup. Ayatollah Khamenei was in his office, and there's nothing extraordinary about that. And the other leaders, the United States is the only regime in the contemporary world that assassinates leaders and targets, so the Americans and the Israelis, what they do is that they bomb apartment blocks, kill everyone inside so that they can get one person. I guess the Iranians underestimated the barbarism of the U.S. military and of course, the similarities that exist between the United States and the Israeli regime. What the Israelis do in Lebanon and Gaza, the United States does too. Perhaps that was that they underestimated. But except for the first couple of days, in this war, as we move forward, they didn't. The assassination attempts became less and less effective, and ultimately, the Iranians defeated them. They've defeated the combined force of the United States, the Israeli regime, and those proxies in the Persian Gulf that facilitated this war. And by the way, these regimes in the Persian Gulf that were part of the war, not only did they provide space, but I'm sure you know that those bases, they pay for the U.S. presence in these bases. It's not as if all costs are paid for by the Americans. No, they subsidize. They do more than subsidize. They pay for a lot of what goes on in these bases. So they shoulder a lot of the financial burden of the wars against Iran, and they helped us, both the Americans and the Israeli regime, because the refueling planes that would fly, they would both American refueling planes. They would refuel both American planes, but also Israeli planes in the war. So these countries were effectively in coalition with the Israelis and the Americans in assaulting Iran. And I've always said that Iran should demand reparations from each and every one of these countries. But anyway, so
there were reports from Iran today that the Emiratis have been delivering billions of dollars and gold to Iran. There was a report today. I saved it. It came out just not long ago, but that's from Iranian sources. The UAE has released several $1 billion of Iran's frozen assets held in in Emirati banks, including 2 tons of gold worth $283 million, with the goal being that Iran spares the United Arab Emirates from future attacks, according to multiple senior sources in Tehran with knowledge of the transfers. The assets were flown to Iran aboard a Boeing 737, blah, 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 operated by who, blah, blah, blah. And
Who said this?
Oh, you didn't see that? That came from Iranian sources.
No, which news agency said that?
And not one of the major. I want to say this: it's not a major news outlet. These are and not a major Iranian news outlets or Western news outlets. But there's been multiple Olsen accounts pointing at a lot of Emirati jets flying to Iran for an hour or two and then flying back. And even today, they fly for 1 hour and then they return. They fly for 1 hour and then they return. And there's been rumors about the UAE delivering a lot of money to Iran for a while. And for me, I'm not surprised. I've been saying this could happen for a while because the Emiratis, they've done business with Iran for a long time and they need stability. Their whole model depends on stability. We've discussed this a while ago. So I'm not saying this is true. This is all unconfirmed, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Even if this were true, which I can't confirm, but these are not reparations. According to this report, these are stolen Iranian assets. So returning stolen assets is not a favor. It's like me stealing your car and then returning it to you, and you thank me for the car.
It's a bit different. These are sanctions imposed by the US and the Western world. That the Emirates should abide by those sanctions. So for the Emirates to unfreeze assets, there must be a deal done with the US as well to allow them to do that. There must be a lot of things happening behind the scenes. You make a valid point. This is not extra money paid, but I definitely see it as a significant gesture. If there's billions that has been unfrozen, that's a lot of money.
Well, we'll have to see. Time will definitely tell. But going back to the initial point that you made, yes, it's clear that overwhelmingly Iranians would like to see Trump killed and executed or put on trial or whatever. And I think the same is true with all those who pulled the trigger and killed, whether in Mina, where they killed all those little children, elementary school kids, mostly girls, or in Lamer, where they bombed on the first day of the war too. They bombed a sports complex, killing a lot of little young women, teenagers who were playing volleyball. And apparently that was an experimental missile, which did pretty good in wiping out those, young teenager girls. But so yeah, I think the Iranians would like us to see a lot of Americans and Israelis executed, pilots and anyone else who was involved. But I don't think the government would be involved in this sort of thing. And I personally think that probably the Israelis made a fool out of Trump. And Trump, of course, what he did was cowardly. No one, all those, I mean, let's assume that the threat was real. Whatever, a group, a militant group, or whoever. All those journalists were allowed to be sacrificial lambs for Trump. I mean, I find that pretty disgusting.